If you haven't ever tried buttermilk baking powder biscuits, you really should. And I have a really great recipe in Pop It in the Toaster Oven. Let me read you what I wrote about it. It says, most toaster oven baking sheets accommodate 6 biscuits. So for a dozen, bake them in 2 batches. These biscuits are easy to make and have many variations, including the cinnamon rolls, which I also have in this book. So I'm going to be assembling my ingredients, but before I do, I'm going to preheat my toaster oven to 400. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is add to this bowl here 2 cups of unbleached flour. Then I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking powder, a half teaspoon of baking soda, and then I'm going to add a half teaspoon of salt, that's to taste. Then I have 3 tablespoons of margarine here, and this is pretty much at room temperature. So I'm just going to add that right in there. Now we have to mix this all together, and I actually have a pastry blender. If you don't have a pastry blender like this, you can just use 2 knives to cut the ingredients in and mix them together that way. And I'm going to mix this until it is thoroughly mixed and crumbly. Now I have a cup of buttermilk. You know, in this case, I didn't have any buttermilk, so I'm using just regular 2% milk, and I put 3 teaspoons of vinegar in it. And if you don't have buttermilk, you can do that, and it'll turn it a little bit so that it is like buttermilk. So what I'm going to be doing here is just adding a little bit at a time and mixing it. What I'm looking for here as I'm adding the milk a little bit at a time is to mix it around and just add enough milk so that I can pinch these ingredients together. And it will stick. If it doesn't stick, it's too dry and crumbly. And if it gets sticky, it's too wet. So this is the part where you have to be just a little cautious. And you can see this dough is sticking together now, and I'm not going to add all of the milk, and because this is the consistency that I want, right here where it sticks together like that. Now I'm just going to sprinkle a little flour right on the surface of the cupboard here. Now I'm just going to knead the dough on the flour. Make sure it's all coming together. Then I'm going to pat it out to a thickness of about 3/4 of an inch. It's fun. Now I have a little cutter here, a biscuit cutter with a little handle. It's about 2.5 inches across. If you don't have anything like this, you could certainly use a glass. You want to dip the glass a little bit in flour, and then you can cut it that way. So I'm just going to start cutting the biscuits out like this. And then I'm going to put them in this pan. Now, in the recipe, I said a 6.5 by 10 square pan. In this case, I have a non-stick cake pan, which I think will work just fine. And even though it's non-stick, I have oiled it a little bit. So I'm just going to place the biscuits dough in the pan. Okay, so I have the dough in there now. A little dough left over, so I will probably have to do a second batch, but this batch is now going to go into the 400-degree oven for 15 minutes. Now, I'm going to set the timer for 15 minutes, but I'm going to watch them. If they're golden brown, they're done. And there's the buttermilk biscuits. They're nicely golden browned. It was 15 minutes. Let's see what they look like inside. Nice and tender and flaky. I think we're going to have to test them to see how they taste now. And there is the buttermilk biscuits in all their glory. So give these a try. They're just yummy, light, flaky, flavorful. And I talked about having a little dough left over from the buttermilk biscuits. And what I've done before, instead of making a couple more biscuits, is I've made a pie crust out of it. You just roll it out a little thinner and put it in a pie pan. And I'm going to put it in the toaster oven at 400 just for a few minutes to brown it. And then I'm going to add, I think I'm going to make a quiche. And here's what happened to the buttermilk biscuit dough. I rolled it out and I made a pie crust instead of extra biscuits. So now I have a pie crust that has been at 400 degrees for just about 5 minutes, lightly browned, ready to go to make. And so this is what I have for the quiche, and this is sort of off the top of my head. I love cooking this way. I've put 4 eggs in here and beat them very well. And then I found, this is a 1/3 cup of ground walnuts. I found that in my refrigerator. I have here a mixture of mozzarella cheese and Asiago all grated together. And it's about 1/2 cup, and I think my plan is to add half of that to the egg and then put the other half on top. Then I went out to the garden and I have a lot of parsley and oregano and chives out there, so I just picked a whole bunch and chopped them together with a scissor, and that's going to go in to the egg mixture right now. So there's the parsley, oregano, and chive mixture. I would say that's probably about 1/2 cup. And then half of the cheese mixture, which is mozzarella and Asiago, one of my favorite cheeses. I think I'm going to do the same with the nuts. I'm going to put half in to the egg mixture, and then I'm going to top with the rest of this. And then for me, I'm going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Mix this together really well. Boy, that looks good. Pour it into the crust. Add the rest of the cheese for topping. And sprinkle with the rest of the ground walnuts. That looks pretty good. What I decided to do here before I put this quiche in is to just cut strips of aluminum foil and place it over the outer edge of the pie crust, because I want the eggs to be fully cooked. I'm going to put this mixture in for 25 minutes at 400, but I don't want to burn the crust on the outside. So into the toaster oven, this buttermilk biscuit crust with a quiche mixture is going to go in. It's at 400, and I think I'm going to set the timer right now for 25 minutes. So there's the quiche that I just made right off the top of my head, and I was using the buttermilk biscuit leftover dough for the crust, which looks really good. I took the foil off, and you could see that this is quite done. It really was only 23 minutes instead of 25, and you can test it always by just touching it like that, and if it springs back, then you know the filling is done. And you can see that here's a really looks quite lovely. I'm going to give it the taste test in a minute. The nuts are all browned on top very nicely. The filling is done, and it looks very nice and cheesy. So this is good. You know, the buttermilk biscuit crust works fine with this. It's really nice and tender. I think the addition of the ground walnuts gives it some lovely texture. And of course, the cheese like Asiago has more flavor than your regular mozzarella or even cheddar. So that really lends a lot, both in the filling and on the topping. And I think my chives and my parsley and everything paired very, very well with the rest of the ingredients. So if you have an impulse to cook off the top of your head sometimes, just put some things together and see how it goes. Many times the the result is really quite rewarding and inspiring.